In the middle of a stormy night, a small French bulldog puppy sat chained outside, shivering and crying in the pouring rain. People passed by without noticing, but then something happened that no one expected. An act of kindness that would change everything. This isn't just a story about suffering. It's about resilience, compassion, and the way one small life can touch many hearts. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. The storm that rolled through the small town of Ashford that night was the kind that made people lock their doors early, pull the curtains tight, and pray the power would not go out. Rain fell in sheets, splashing against the windows and pooling on the uneven sidewalks. Wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying the sharp scent of wet asphalt and broken branches. It was on this unforgiving night that a small French bulldog puppy, no more than 4 months old, sat tethered to a rusted chain outside a rundown apartment building. His tiny body shook with cold, his fur plastered flat against his skin as the rain drenched him over and over again. The chain was short, giving him little space to move. He tried to curl into himself, pressing his belly close to the muddy ground to find some warmth, but the water seeped in from every angle. His cries echoed faintly against the storm, soft yelps of desperation that were almost drowned out by the thunder overhead. Anyone rushing past would have mistaken the sound for the squeak of an old gate or the creak of the storm-battered wires swinging in the wind. But to those who listened closely, it was unmistakably the cry of a puppy begging not to be forgotten. Inside the building, no one came to check. The tenants were used to the noise of the rain and the stray animals that sometimes lingered in the alleyway. The world outside was harsh, and for most people, survival meant minding their own business. Yet for this puppy, survival was becoming less certain with every passing minute. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his breath shallow and strained as the rain kept beating down on his fragile body. Then came footsteps. The sound of boots splashing through puddles grew louder, approaching the narrow alley where the puppy lay. At first, the little dog lifted his head in fear. Strangers had not been kind to him in the past, and his young heart was already wary of people. He tugged weakly at the chain, trying to back away as much as he could, but the cold metal around his neck held him firmly in place. The footsteps stopped, and a voice cut through the storm. "Hey, what's going on here?" It was the voice of a man, low and filled with concern. A flashlight beam pierced the darkness, landing on the trembling French bulldog. The puppy blinked, his watery eyes reflecting the sudden light. For the first time that night, his cries paused. He wasn't sure if this human was different, but something in the tone, gentle, questioning, made him wait. The man crouched down, the beam of the flashlight steady on the small figure. What he saw pulled at his heart instantly. The puppy's fur clung to his thin frame, making his ribs visible beneath the soaked coat. His paws were covered in mud, his ears drooping under the weight of water, and his face, oh, that face, was a portrait of exhaustion and quiet pleading. It wasn't just an abandoned dog. It was a life hanging in the balance. "Who would leave you out here like this?" the man whispered, reaching a cautious hand forward. The puppy flinched but did not pull away entirely. It was as if the storm had drained the last of his strength, leaving him with only one fragile hope, that maybe this time, someone had come to help. The man tugged gently at the chain, testing its strength. Rust crackled, but the lock held firm. His jaw tightened. Whoever had done this had made sure the puppy could not escape. He pulled a small multi-tool from his jacket pocket, fumbling with cold fingers as rain pounded on his back. The puppy whimpered softly, eyes locked on the man's face as if sensing that this moment would decide everything. The chain gave way with a sharp metallic snap. For the first time, the little French bulldog was free. He stumbled forward, not running away but collapsing against the man's boots. His small body trembled uncontrollably, not just from the cold but from the release of fear and suffering he had endured for hours. The man scooped him up quickly, pressing him against his chest to shield him from the storm. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice almost lost in the thunder. "I've got you." And in that moment, so simple yet so profound, the story truly began. A bond was forming, forged in rain and desperation, that neither the man nor the puppy would ever forget. When Daniel carried the soaked French Bulldog puppy into his modest apartment, he could feel the tiny body trembling against his chest. The rainwater had darkened the puppy's cream-colored fur, and his eyes, large, round, and filled with fear, darted around the room as though every shadow held another chain, another cruel hand ready to restrain him. Daniel set him down gently on an old blanket near the radiator, hoping the warmth would chase away the cold that had sunk deep into his fragile body. The puppy didn't move at first. He crouched low, belly pressed to the ground, ears back, as if uncertain whether this new place was safer than the street. Daniel sat a few feet away, not reaching out immediately. "It's okay, little guy," he whispered, his voice steady, patient. He knew trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. Minutes passed. The storm still raged outside, wind rattling the window panes. Every clap of thunder made the puppy flinch, his tiny frame jerking in fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the puppy lifted his head just enough to glance at Daniel. Their eyes met. For the briefest second, the fear seemed to soften. Daniel reached into the bag of supplies he'd picked up on his way home. Some canned puppy food, a small bowl, and a leash. He opened the can and placed it near the blanket. The smell filled the room, rich and meaty. Hunger won over fear. The puppy inched forward cautiously, his paws hesitant, until he reached the bowl. He ate quickly, almost desperately, as if convinced the food might vanish if he slowed down. Watching him, Daniel felt his throat tighten. How long had this little soul been left out there, chained and forgotten, crying for someone to notice? He clenched his fists against the rising anger but forced himself to breathe. Tonight wasn't about anger, it was about comfort. When the puppy finished, he licked the empty bowl, then looked around as though still searching for more. Daniel slowly extended his hand, palm up, waiting. The puppy sniffed the air but didn't approach. Instead, he curled back onto the blanket, curling his body into a tight ball, his back facing Daniel as though to say, "I want to trust you, but I don't know how." Daniel didn't push. He lay down on the floor a short distance away, stretching out his own blanket. He wanted the puppy to know he wasn't going to leave, not now, not ever. Hours passed like that, two strangers in the quiet rhythm of the night. At one point, the puppy shifted in his sleep and let out a soft whimper, his paws twitching as though he were running in a nightmare. Instinctively, Daniel whispered again, "You're safe now. No more chains." The words seemed to settle something in the air, because the puppy's breathing slowed, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. By morning, the storm had cleared, sunlight spilling across the apartment floor. Daniel woke to find the puppy no longer on his blanket. Instead, the little French Bulldog was nestled right beside him, his head resting lightly against Daniel's arm. It was the first sign of trust. Small, fragile, but real. Daniel smiled softly, not daring to move too much for fear of breaking the fragile thread between them. "We'll take it one step at a time, buddy," he whispered. But as the day unfolded, Daniel realized the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The puppy barked anxiously when Daniel left the room, panicked at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, and hid under the couch at the sight of strangers. Each behavior told a story of neglect and fear, of a life where trust had been broken too many times. Still, Daniel made a silent promise that morning. No matter how long it took, he would show this puppy, this little survivor, that love could replace fear, and kindness could erase the scars of cruelty. The first night had ended with hope, but ahead lay challenges that would test them both in ways Daniel couldn't yet imagine. The days following the storm were filled with uncertainty for Daniel and the little French Bulldog puppy he had rescued. The pup, whom Daniel had decided to name Stormy, remained fragile both in body and spirit. His ribs were still visible under his wet, patchy fur, and his large, dark eyes carried a mix of fear and sadness. Daniel did everything he could to create an environment where Stormy could begin to heal. He bought soft blankets and laid them in a quiet corner of his apartment, away from the noise of the city streets. Bowls of clean water and fresh food were always nearby. Yet Stormy often refused to eat, sniffing the kibble and then turning away. Daniel worried. He found himself waking up at night to check on the puppy, kneeling down to gently stroke his head and whisper, "You're safe now, little guy. No more rain, no more chains." At first, Stormy would flinch at even the lightest touch, shrinking into himself as if expecting harm. But Daniel never rushed him. He knew trust couldn't be forced, it had to be earned. The breakthrough came on the fourth night. Daniel had been sitting on the couch, exhausted after another long day at work. He had left a small plate of boiled chicken on the floor near Stormy's blanket, hoping the scent might tempt him. To his surprise, as Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes, he heard soft footsteps. Stormy, with his short little legs and hesitant steps, was approaching the plate. His nose twitched as he sniffed the food. Daniel didn't move a muscle, afraid that even a sudden breath might scare the pup away. Slowly, Stormy began to nibble, chewing carefully, as though every bite was a risk. Daniel's chest tightened, not out of sadness, but from relief. When the plate was empty, Stormy lifted his head and glanced toward Daniel. Their eyes met. For a brief second, it felt as though the wall between them had cracked. The puppy didn't run away. Instead, he let out the faintest sigh, curled into a ball near the couch and closed his eyes. Daniel couldn't stop the tears that filled his eyes. It was the first time Stormy had willingly chosen to be near him. The small act of trust, fragile but real, was worth more than any words could express. From that night on, small changes began to take place. Each morning, Stormy inched closer to Daniel during breakfast, watching him with cautious curiosity. By the end of the week, he was brave enough to rest his chin on Daniel's foot while lying on the floor. It was a gesture of silent acceptance, and Daniel treated it like gold. Still, setbacks came. One afternoon, as Daniel carried a folded umbrella into the apartment, Stormy panicked. His little body trembled, and he bolted under the table, whining in fear. Daniel immediately dropped the umbrella and crouched down. "It's okay, Stormy. It's just me," he whispered. It took nearly an hour for the pup to calm down, but Daniel didn't complain. Instead, he realized how deep Stormy's scars truly were. One Saturday morning, Daniel decided to take Stormy for a short walk. The pup resisted at first, pulling back against the leash as though it were another chain meant to trap him. Daniel kneeled beside him, holding the leash gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "This isn't to hurt you, Stormy. It's so you can see the world without fear." After several tries, Stormy took a shaky step forward. Then another. The moment his paws touched the grass in the small park nearby, he froze, staring at the open space around him. The fresh air carried the scent of earth and flowers, so different from the wet concrete and cold metal chains of his past. Daniel waited patiently, letting Stormy explore at his own pace. And then it happened, a moment Daniel would never forget. Stormy crouched low, wiggled his small body, and for the very first time, dashed across the grass in a clumsy run. His ears flopped, his stubby legs scrambled, and for those few seconds, he looked like a dog who had never known fear. Daniel laughed, his heart swelling with pride. "That's it, Stormy. That's you. That's who you really are." When Stormy finally returned, panting and wagging his small tail, he surprised Daniel even more. He placed his paw gently on Daniel's knee and looked up as if to say, "Thank you." It wasn't complete trust yet. There were still shadows in Stormy's eyes, reminders of the night he had been chained in the rain. But Daniel knew, in that instant, that they had turned a corner. The journey would be long, but for the first time, both man and dog were walking it together. And deep down, Daniel couldn't help but wonder, if such a broken little soul could begin to heal, what else might be possible in their future? Stormy's progress was slow but steady. Each day seemed to peel away another layer of fear, revealing glimpses of the puppy he might have been before the storm and the chains. But healing is never a straight path. Just as hope began to take root, shadows from the past returned, threatening everything Daniel and Stormy had worked for. Started on a Tuesday evening. Daniel had just returned from work, loosening his tie and setting his keys on the counter, when he noticed something unusual. Stormy wasn't waiting by the door as he usually did now, tail giving tentative wags. Instead, the little French bulldog was pressed against the far corner of the living room, his body trembling. His eyes were locked on the window. Daniel followed his gaze and froze. Parked across the street was an old, rusted pickup truck. Its driver, a man with a rough appearance and a cigarette dangling from his mouth, leaned casually against the hood. But it wasn't just anyone. It was the man Daniel recognized from the night he'd found Stormy chained in the rain. The man had a hard expression, his eyes scanning the apartment windows until they landed on Daniel's. He smirked. Daniel's stomach tightened. "How did he find us?" he whispered, glancing down at Stormy. The little dog let out a whimper and pressed closer to the wall, his tiny frame shaking. For the rest of the evening, the truck didn't move. The man stayed outside, sometimes pacing, sometimes sitting back with his arms crossed. Daniel couldn't understand his intentions, but he knew one thing. Stormy was terrified. And if the man had treated him cruelly once, there was no reason to believe he wouldn't do it again. That night, Daniel lay awake, listening to the shallow breaths of Stormy curled at his feet. He promised himself he wouldn't let anyone hurt the puppy again. But deep inside, a gnawing fear took root. How long could he protect him if this man was determined to take him back? The next morning, Daniel decided to take action. He went to the local police station, Stormy resting nervously in a carrier by his side. He explained everything: the night he found the dog, the chains, the storm, and now the man lurking outside his home. The officer, a woman named Sergeant Miller, leaned back in her chair. If this man was neglecting or abusing the dog, he has no legal claim anymore. What you did was rescue, not theft. But if he's showing up outside your home, that's harassment. We'll keep an eye out. It gave Daniel some relief. But when he left the station, Stormy still cowered every time a car engine roared nearby. The trauma was etched into his small body, and Daniel knew police patrols couldn't erase that. Days passed. The man in the truck didn't return immediately, but his presence lingered like a storm cloud. Daniel noticed how Stormy grew restless at night, waking from bad dreams with sharp whimpers. One evening, during a walk, the little dog suddenly froze on the sidewalk, his eyes wide. Across the street, the pickup was back. This time, the man shouted, "That's my dog. You hear me? My dog." His voice was loud enough to draw the attention of neighbors peering through curtains. Stormy yelped, his tiny body pressing against Daniel's leg as though begging him not to let go. Daniel's protective instincts flared. "He's not yours," he shot back, holding Stormy tightly. "You lost that right the day you chained him in the rain." The man cursed, but didn't cross the street. He spat on the ground and climbed back into his truck, the engine growling as he sped away. Still, the encounter left its mark. That night, Stormy refused to eat, curling into his blanket with his face hidden. Daniel sat beside him, gently stroking his back. "I promise, no one's going to take you away from me. You're home now, Stormy, and I'll fight for you." The following week brought a turning point. Daniel received a knock on his door one evening, his heart sinking as he prepared for the worst. But it wasn't the man, it was Sergeant Miller. She had filed a report, and the authorities had confirmed the man had a history of animal cruelty. He wouldn't be bothering Daniel or Stormy again. When the door closed behind her, Daniel sank to his knees, pulling Stormy into his arms. For the first time since their paths had crossed, the little French bulldog licked Daniel's cheek. It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. But as Daniel held him close, he couldn't shake the thought. If one man could hurt Stormy so deeply, how many other dogs were still out there, waiting for someone to step in? The bond between them had grown stronger, but so had Daniel's sense of responsibility. Protecting Stormy wasn't just about saving one dog anymore. It was about standing up against cruelty itself. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for that battle. For weeks, Daniel and Stormy had built a rhythm. The once fearful French bulldog puppy, who had trembled in chains and rain, now wagged his tiny tail at the sound of Daniel's footsteps. Yet beneath the progress lingered a shadow, a question Daniel couldn't ignore. Why had such a young, pure soul been chained and abandoned in the first place? One quiet Saturday morning, Daniel was walking Stormy down a narrow lane near the edge of town. The puppy had grown braver, sniffing curiously at every bush, tugging lightly on the leash. A neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Callahan, waved them over. "That's the pup everyone's been talking about, isn't it?" she asked gently, her eyes softening as she crouched to pet Stormy. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I found him chained during the storm. He's come a long way, but he's still healing." Mrs. Callahan's expression shifted. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I think I know whose dog that is, or rather, whose dog he was." The words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. She pointed toward a house at the far end of the street, its windows shuttered, the yard overgrown. A man lived there, rough around the edges. Always kept dogs, but none of them lasted long. People said he bred them carelessly, sometimes chained them outside without shelter. "He left town a month ago. I guess your little one here didn't matter enough to take along." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He glanced down at Stormy, who wagged happily, oblivious to the truth. Anger surged inside him. Anger at the cruelty, the neglect, the coldness of someone who could abandon a puppy like discarded trash. But alongside the anger came resolve. "No one," Daniel whispered, stroking the pup's silky ears, "will ever treat you that way again." That night, as rain pattered against the windows, Daniel sat by the fire with Stormy curled against his lap. He thought of the house Mrs. Callahan had pointed out, of the chains, the neglect, the wasted potential of lives unloved. Stormy whimpered softly in his sleep, as if reliving the fear. Daniel made a silent vow. This puppy's story would not end in pain. It would be rewritten in love. The following week, Daniel took Stormy to the vet for a final round of checkups. Dr. Evans, the veterinarian, smiled as she examined the puppy's progress. "He's stronger now. His scars are healing. But emotionally, it may take longer. Dogs remember, especially ones who've known cruelty." Daniel nodded. "Then I'll be patient. I'll give him every reason to believe the world isn't as cruel as he's seen." As if to prove the point, Stormy nudged Daniel's hand with his nose, looking up with trusting eyes. That moment felt like a revelation, not just about the past, but about the future. The puppy's resilience was a mirror of Daniel's own struggles with loneliness and doubt. Saving Stormy had given Daniel purpose, and perhaps, in a way, Stormy was saving him too. Later that month, Daniel took Stormy to the community park for the first time. At first, the French Bulldog puppy clung close, his little paws hesitant on the grass. But then a ball rolled near them, dropped by a child playing fetch with his retriever. Daniel tossed it gently. To his surprise, Stormy darted forward, ears flopping, tail wagging furiously. He grabbed the ball in his mouth and pranced back, triumphant. Laughter bubbled from Daniel's chest. "That's it, Stormy. You're free now. Free to play. Free to live." The revelation was clear. Stormy's future would not be defined by the cruelty of his past. Together, they would write a story of healing, loyalty, and unconditional love. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, Daniel lifted Stormy into his arms. The once broken puppy nestled against his chest, heart beating in steady rhythm with his rescuers. And for the first time, Daniel didn't just see himself as Stormy's savior. He saw them as partners in survival, two souls bound together, proving that love could transform even the darkest beginnings into something beautiful. The arrival of spring brought a quiet transformation. Trees along the neighborhood streets bloomed, and the air carried the soft hum of renewal. For Daniel, the change wasn't just in the season, it was in Stormy. The once fearful French Bulldog puppy, who had trembled beneath chains and rain, now greeted each day with cautious curiosity, his dark eyes brighter, his tiny steps more confident. Daniel noticed it most during their morning walks. Stormy would tug gently on the leash, leading Daniel toward the park as if he finally believed good things awaited him there. Gone was the constant flinch at passing cars or sudden noises. Instead, he stood taller, chest puffed out, as though reclaiming the dignity once stripped from him. But healing wasn't always linear. Some nights, Daniel still heard faint whimpers from the crate. On stormy evenings, the sound of thunder made Stormy curl tightly against Daniel's side, shaking until exhaustion pulled him into sleep. These moments reminded Daniel of the scars hidden beneath the progress. They weren't visible anymore, but they lingered like shadows of a past too cruel to forget. Determined to help, Daniel enrolled Stormy in a small obedience class. The first session was chaotic. Stormy barked nervously at larger dogs, refusing to leave Daniel's side. Some owners chuckled, others looked annoyed. Daniel crouched beside him, whispering encouragement. "Take your time, buddy. You don't have to be perfect. Just be brave." By the third session, Stormy surprised everyone. He trotted across the mat, responding to commands with eager enthusiasm. The trainer, a kind woman named Emily, patted Daniel's shoulder. "This little guy has heart. He wants to trust. You just gave him the chance." The words filled Daniel with pride, but also with something deeper: hope. Stormy wasn't just surviving, he was blossoming. One weekend, Daniel decided to take Stormy on a small trip to the countryside. It was the first time the puppy had experienced wide-open fields. Daniel let him off the leash, heart pounding nervously, but Stormy didn't run away. Instead, he bounded across the grass, ears flopping, turning back every few seconds to make sure Daniel was watching. His bark carried joy this time, not fear. Daniel laughed, dropping to his knees as Stormy raced back into his arms. "Look at you," he whispered, holding the puppy close. "You're finally free." That night, as they camped beneath the stars, Daniel reflected on how much both of their lives had changed. Before Stormy, his days had been gray, predictable, and achingly lonely. Now each sunrise carried purpose. Each small victory, a tail wag, a playful bark, a trusting look, felt like a triumph worth celebrating. But life has a way of testing bonds. The following week, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. It was from the local shelter, the same one where he had first taken Stormy after rescuing him. Inside was a letter. "We wanted to inform you that we've identified Stormy's former owner. He recently returned to town and may try to reclaim the dog. Please contact us immediately to discuss your options." Daniel's heart sank. The thought of Stormy going back to the neglectful hands of a man who had left him chained in the rain was unbearable. As if sensing the shift in mood, Stormy nudged Daniel's hand, whining softly. "No," Daniel said firmly, voice trembling with resolve. "You're mine now. No one is taking you away." The chapter of healing was beginning to collide with a new storm, one that would test not just Daniel's determination but also the strength of their bond. That night, Daniel sat by the fire, Stormy asleep against his lap. He realized something. This wasn't just about saving a dog anymore. It was about standing up for love, for loyalty, for the belief that every life deserves dignity. And he was prepared to fight for it. As the flames flickered, Daniel whispered a promise to the little French bulldog who had already changed his life. "We'll face this together. No matter what happens, you'll never be abandoned again." Stormy stirred, letting out a soft sigh, as if he understood. The new beginning had arrived, but so had the final challenge that would decide their future. The days after receiving the shelter's letter felt heavy, each one carrying the weight of uncertainty. Daniel had always known that Stormy's past might resurface, but the possibility of losing him now, after everything they had survived together, was unbearable. The once gray mornings that Stormy had brightened now seemed fragile, as though their happiness hung by a thread. Daniel contacted the shelter immediately. The staff confirmed that the previous owner, a man named Carl, had been located. Legally, Carl still had some claim, though the authorities were reviewing evidence of neglect. Daniel's stomach tightened with every word. If Carl truly wanted Stormy back, the law might side with him. At home, Stormy sensed Daniel's unease. He no longer bounded around the house with the same carefree energy. Instead, he followed Daniel closely, his dark eyes searching for reassurance. On rainy nights, he pressed against Daniel's chest as if to remind him of the chains they had broken together. "You're safe with me," Daniel whispered. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. A week later, the case went before a local animal welfare board. Daniel arrived early, Stormy trotting beside him, his small paws clicking against the linoleum floor. Inside the hearing room, Carl sat with folded arms, eyes cold and unrepentant. He claimed Stormy was his property, that the situation months ago had been a mistake, and that he deserved another chance. Daniel clenched his fists. When it was his turn to speak, his voice shook but carried truth. "Stormy isn't property," he said. "He's a living soul who deserves love and safety. I found him chained, starving, and crying in the rain. If I hadn't intervened, he wouldn't be here today. He trusts me now because he knows I will never hurt him. Please don't send him back to the very pain he escaped." As if on cue, Stormy placed his paw on Daniel's knee, gazing up with those soulful eyes that spoke louder than words ever could. Gasps rippled through the small audience gathered. Even the board members leaned closer, visibly moved. Carl scoffed. "It's just a dog." The room fell silent. One of the board members adjusted her glasses, her expression stern. "No, sir," she replied firmly. "It's not just a dog. It's a life, and we take that very seriously." After a tense deliberation, the decision came. The board ruled in Daniel's favor, citing Carl's neglect as disqualifying him from reclaiming Stormy. Relief washed over Daniel like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Stormy was his legally, fully, and forever. Outside the courthouse, Daniel dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the little French bulldog. Tears blurred his vision, but his voice was steady. "We did it, Stormy. You're free. You'll never have to go back." Stormy barked joyfully, his tail wagging with abandon, as though he understood the gravity of the moment. Passers-by stopped to smile at the sight. A man and his dog, bound not by chains, but by love and loyalty. From that day forward, Stormy's transformation was undeniable. The shadows of fear still lingered in thunderstorms or sudden loud noises, but his resilience shone brighter. He became a fixture in the community, known as the little French bulldog who had overcome cruelty with courage. Children petted him on walks, neighbors offered treats, and strangers stopped Daniel to ask about their story. Each time, Daniel shared not just the pain Stormy had endured, but the hope that followed. At night, when Stormy curled at the foot of Daniel's bed or rested his head on Daniel's chest, Daniel often thought back to the first night in the rain. He realized then that rescuing Stormy had also rescued him. From loneliness, from emptiness, from a life without purpose. Their story wasn't about a man saving a dog. It was about two souls saving each other. And as the sun set on that chapter, Daniel looked at Stormy with quiet gratitude. "You're not just my dog," he whispered. "You're my family, and together we'll face whatever comes next." Stormy yawned, nestled closer, and drifted into sleep. His small body no longer trembled, his breath steady and calm. He was home, finally unshakably home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in the power of loyalty and love.